I have a couple jokes,
Okay.
but I'm pretty sure I forgot to update the setting for when we do the outro video that will play the music.
hmm
But
hmm
anyways, Paul, you look like you're in jail.
Somebody said on, I guess on Instagram, it looked
Mm.
like one of those backgrounds at an improv comedy club. Like I stand up there with a drink in my hand in front of a microphone, and I guess that kind of does describe what I do. Yeah, and it's not ready. It's not complete yet.
Hmm.
I threw it together before I went on the trip, and then, we got home late last night, so I haven't really screwed with it yet. But as you can probably see, it's a little ripply
Yeah.
still. I was kind of hoping just hanging there it would straighten out, but I have to pin the bottom somehow. It's not really clear I'm going to do that,
Does it
but
does it slide? Is there any room to slide it back? Because it looks like it's right on top of you a little bit. But
I'd have to move myself forward. It's like right against the wall.
mm,
I've already, I mean, the desk right now is probably 4 feet forward from where it was.
yeah,
I mean, I guess I could still move it forward still some more, but
something.
I can do that.
Yeah.
The problem though is the angle, right? So
Hmm.
I actually not that you can see this, but if you kind of imagine I'm on a desk that's maybe 5 feet wide. Normally I was kind of over in the middle of the desk, like where my PC
Yeah.
was, because of how this has to be positioned. Basically, I had to shift my position on the desk over to the left for me,
Hmm.
so that I'm kind of on the left side of it now instead of right in the middle, and that has something to do with being able to see the edges of the screen, and so, or the edges of the,
Yeah.
the tapestry or whatever this thing is. Um, Lack
Go
of a
on.
better term, but yeah. So if I move forward, the problem might be that the field of view gets too big when it's just me, and you'll see the edges of it.
Uh,
So I will. We can
well,
screw with that. But
yeah. I
like I
mean,
said,
I will
I
tell
threw it
you,
together.
I've done something in my studio, and I can't figure out why there's this massive shadow
hmm
all of a sudden when there wasn't previously. Maybe I need to raise that thing up some more. Um, I
Yeah,
will tell you that your color balance is perfect. It's no longer.
it's yeah. Well, I think the walls was kind of look mustardy
Yeah.
when they're on video. Now you're not getting that cast
Yep.
from it,
Exactly.
and so it's seeing it more accurately, maybe. Because I think, well, I would say this. It still has a little bit more of there's a bit of a brown tinge to it that I see in the video that
Hmm.
in real life it's a little like more of a dark gray or a
Hmm.
grayer color, I guess. It's obviously gray, but it's still, I guess it's a little warmer still.
Gotcha.
But it's okay. It looks fine,
I don't know why,
I
but
think.
this shadow is just really bothering me.
Maybe you have like stomach cancer. You should look into this.
It's a shadow. It's,
Well, right, but I'm like, this is like a podcast from the Stephen King world, right? It like means something.
anyways, so you got your hands on HoloLens too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it
Tell us
was
more.
really impressive. I have to step back and kind of frame this a little bit, because when you think back to the original HoloLens and the experiences we had with it when it was a prototype, remember it was connected to all those cables, and it was a really complex affair of measuring the distance between your eyes and getting the exact fit on the headset, and things had to be lined up exactly. It was, and of course, and then the big complaint when once you get past the magic of what they were doing, because there is a central computer science victory of you've created these virtual objects
Hmm.
using computer science. You root them in your mind through using the way we see things in the real world, and they react to the real world in realistic ways. So if you have an artificial or a hologram of a ball and you drop it and there's a table there, it will bounce on the table, and it's consistent with the real world. It never hovers, it never
Hmm.
blinks, it never
Hmm.
is off a little bit. Like the magic persists, and that has always been maybe the most impressive thing about it, I think. The thing that took it away a little bit was the field of view thing, which I've raised again and again, and I kind of likened it to a mail slot. And so if you're familiar with mixed reality, I'm not saying this for your benefit, Brad, I know you know this, but
Yeah.
just so people understand, in mixed reality, you have a very broad field of view. You don't
Hmm.
typically see the room you're in, but without moving your head and looking around, you can kind of peripherally see in all directions. It's more like real sight. With an augmented reality headset like a HoloLens, um, you do see the real world, and so you can see. I could see this whole room like I'm looking at it now. But The holograms appear only in a kind of a rectangular area in the middle.
Hmm.
And so if things are moving around, they will move outside of that rectangle, and you can't see them. Or it could be like a hologram of a human being standing there.
Hmm.
He might be clipped so that you can't see his head or his feet. You just
Right.
see the middle part of his body unless you kind of move your head up and down and you can see it. And so because of the smallness of that field of view, the lack of tallness, I guess, that could be a little limiting.
Yeah. Now they said that
So
the field of view is doubled.
yeah, and
Did
by the
you?
way, yeah, that is exactly how I would describe it, and it almost seems like it's mostly vertically doubled, right? So if
Oh,
you
okay.
go to that kind of mail slot
Hmm.
view that I described before, which is slightly exaggerated, it wasn't really that, like a CinemaScope display, but
Hmm.
it certainly much wider than it was tall. It's almost twice as tall as what it feels like. It could be a little wider too, but really it was this that was the limiting thing. It's like you're trying to see
Yeah.
the holograms. So it's more like this now, and that really helps a lot. But here's the thing. It's important, right? They had to do that. In
Yeah.
fact, if they hadn't done that, the other things I'm about to describe would almost not matter in some ways, right? But what's interesting is the other things they did to it are so impressive that you almost forget about that complaint. Like you almost forget that this happened too, and that's important, right? Because there are like these central innovations to this thing that are really super impressive. So and they go together. So you might remember, I think it was on this podcast, I kind of blurted out one time that the next HoloLens was going to have what I called hand tracking capabilities.
Hmm.
The idea was that, as they developed HoloLens, they found what virtual reality vendors found, which is you can't just use gestures to
Right.
do manipulations of objects. It's just not accurate enough. And so they designed a controller. And the controller allows you to, interact with objects more easily. But you have to hold these things. You're kind of looking at it's a combination of virtual and real, and you're doing things with the hands, and it's kind of weird. So hand tracking lets the device use cameras to track your position of your hands and how they're oriented. If you're like squeezing something or pressing a button or whatever it might be. So it tracks that. I had heard of that. What I had not heard was the eye tracking feature. This one's a little weird. Like if you've ever used any virtual reality, augmented reality thing, and you want to look up at like an object that's over here, you kind of naturally do this kind of thing where you're looking around with your head, You don't have to do that. And they kept telling me as I did it, like, you don't have to move your head. I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry. It's just hard not to. But all you have to do is just look. And so I guess the thing you could compare this to is like a first-person shooter as they evolved. Back in the day, you would just move forward on an even plane, and the way you were facing is the way you would fire. Over time, it became real 3D. And the idea was you could be running straight ahead, but you could be looking up and to the right and then firing up and to the right. And so it separates the movement from the way you're looking.
Yeah.
And when you combine that with voice control, you can do things like you have objects floating in space. I'd say you have to kind of almost make something up. And you look up at the one at the left, top left. You don't have to move your head again. It's hard not to. So even now, it's hard not to.
Yeah.
And you say pop or something. That was one of the little cute demos. And the thing pops, It knows because it's tracking your eyes which one you're looking at. You could look at this thing and you could grab this thing and you could do two different things to them at the same time if you wanted to. And so again, it's eye tracking, hand tracking, and then voice control, which was kind of already there. And it's got the immersive audio and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It creates this, and I should say the field of view too, because again, anything that takes you out of what you're doing, like that field of view would, ruins the experience. But once it's just kind of working, it all kind of comes together into this thing where it's like it's immersive to a degree that is truly impressive. It's like the I forget the old line about technology that is magic because you can't tell that it's technology, that kind of thing. It creates a much more natural experience, and this is not as big of a deal, but you would typically have to do some kind of a thing where it measures the distance between your eyes. You spend a lot of time screwing with the helmet and trying to get it right and all this stuff. And all of that stuff is automatic now. It's also tied into your login, which is Windows Hello based. And so you put this thing on your head like a hat. It logs you in from your eyes. It knows it's you. It sets it configures the distance between your eyes and internally because it knows who you are. If it's the first time, it will do it then. It doesn't require testing or, configuration of any kind. And then because the interactions are so natural now, you can literally reach out and grab like the corner of an object, expand it this way or contract it or pick it out of a thing and move it over here and put it down. You're not feeling it because you're still kind of, grasping in space here. But because there is a visual feedback to your actions, it just kind of all comes together into this thing that works. I mean, it's
nice. It's good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all good. Actually, the most important thing while you're talking there is I moved my light, and you can see it's somewhat better now.
Jesus. You're really kind of obsessed by the light thing.
Well, it was bothering me. But what the one thing I kept thinking about the whole time we were talking about this is Microsoft with HoloLens 2, and we talked about this a little bit on Friday. It basically is creating the baseline for what every other competitor who wants to enter this market now has to meet, right? This is if you launch a product without eye tracking, you're a step behind.
It's a children's toy at this point,
right? Unless somebody comes in with just perfect, field of view technology, that's probably the one thing that could maybe really impact HoloLens if somebody figures out how to get perfect peripheral and the whole thing. But
dude, that's literally a computer science problem, right?
Yeah. It is.
The one thing I would have said about the field of view, if anyone had asked or whatever, was, like you always complain about this, but don't you think they're just going to fix that? My answer would have been yes, I do. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more on Windows Weekly, but basically, because you had written about this. In fact, I was standing there in the streets of Vegas when you were talking on the phone to somebody about it. But they originally had a HoloLens V2 that they ended up not releasing, and the sort of vague reason at the time was it wasn't enough of an advance. That was tied almost solely to field of view. The number one complaint that they got from customers was that field of view. That thing that I complained about is the same thing that everyone complained about, right? So they knew that they couldn't ship a second one unless they fixed that. But logically, that is going to improve over time. Of course it is, right? So I would say that, look, it can always get better for sure. And there are issues with making it too good because it's almost like a vertigo kind of a problem that can occur when you lose your routing in the real world and all that. But I think these are issues that they can overcome. And I would say even in this version, it's already been overcome to a degree that I find to be acceptable.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff that you can talk about, like Satya Nadella and saw this and wanted to pump this thing out. I think a lot of other people, including previous Microsoft CEOs, would have said, this is amazing. Keep plugging away at it.
Yeah.
And he was like, no, you got to release this now. And I think that, they might have waited, I guess it would have been about 4 years, right? Until they got to this point. There's another interesting, sorry to keep going on and on, but there's a lot to this. I mean, the other interesting side effect to HoloLens is that, it kind of plugs into this broader Microsoft ecosystem now in a very natural way. When HoloLens 1.0 came out, Microsoft literally had no idea what anyone would do with it. And we talked about this, there were all these gaming demos, like the Minecraft thing where you walk around the table and there's the Minecraft world and you can see the Minecraft cave in the wall with the bats coming out of it. And they did the demo on stage with the alien robot things coming through the wall and you're firing the gun and everything. Now, I don't think Microsoft believed that like V1 there would be like lots of people playing games on this thing, but it was such an obvious visual demo, and they did believe that gaming would be part of it. In fact, I don't, not to credit Satya Nadella exactly, but you'll remember from that time period, they credited him with saying, "You got to think past games. This is about more than games." I think it's fair to say today that it's not about games at all.
Right.
Not that
I would agree.
There may not be gaming applications at some point as it gets cheaper, for one thing, and maybe more consumer oriented. But the thing that's happened in the interim is real markets have evolved that want this device, and car makers is the one I keep thinking of. The ability to not have to build a giant clay model of a car to see how a door fits into a frame. They can do this thing virtually and then change it as much as they want.
Yep.
Without having to screw around with physical things. That is transformative. Now, It's not particularly exciting from my perspective as a personal computing enthusiast. That's not the point. This thing is literally viable in the real world, and now they know that, and so that informs how it evolves. For V2, the customers who are using it provide feedback and say, we love this thing, but we need this, and technology improves with the field of view, et cetera, et cetera. So it is so much more mature now than it was when we first saw it, 4 years ago, I guess.
I mean, they said it, I think 4 or 5 times I was counting. They said value from day one when you buy this.
Yeah. But I mean, they were literally just throwing spaghetti at a wall. Like, we have no idea.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's why they showed games. They showed off all sorts. You know what I'm honestly happy they didn't show? Was an elevator demo.
Yeah.
That was one of the first, I think, use cases that a company bought it for. And so like, we're going to, sell this out. And then they did everything but that to show that more industries are buying in.
Yeah. I mean, there's also, there was always this kind of push, like, we're going to use HoloLens for like medical things. And the demo was fake. No one does this, but it was like, we're going to have surgery remotely. No, no, you are not. Like, I'm pinching. Oh, is that his liver? I meant to pinch the other thing. There's no way. However, when you look at V2 and you see the way that it has improved, I'm not saying V2 is ready for that, but now you can kind of say, okay, actually, I could see them getting to the point where that kind of thing is possible. It's going to start on, something less dramatic than like major surgery, obviously, but the applications for this are pretty vast, and tying it into the entire Microsoft ecosystem, which they did, not just the cloud services stuff, but the AI, the openness stuff, and then the accessibility stuff as well. I mean, it's the perfect Microsoft product, Yeah,
it's not hard to see how this really moves forward with computing. And that's why Microsoft is investing so much, and they're ahead of the market until it fully arrives. But they're already making money on it today, so that's.
Well, it's really this is very much like the modern Microsoft. We always have this conversation, like iPad and Android, and they have these AR applications that are great. A lot of educational stuff. I always talk about the museum one where you're looking at a dinosaur skeleton, you hold up your phone or whatever, and you can see the actual dinosaur, right? And it's excellent, And when you see something like that, you say, well, of course, everyone has a phone. Any phone can do this basically now or going forward, certainly. And Microsoft's selling this thing over here that costs $3,500 or $5,000 or whatever the price is. And how are these things in any way comparable? And they're not. And then you say, well, that means that Microsoft lost. And it doesn't mean that. This fits into Microsoft's core markets. It makes sense for the business customers who are currently Microsoft 365 customers, perhaps, or Azure customers, or whatever they might be. And it's a different world. It is a world of vertical markets of, medical and engineering and construction and car building and whatever it is, which has nothing to do with it's February again. What are the fun new smartphones that everyone's coming out with? Like, it's a completely different kind of a thing. But it doesn't make it any less viable. And so, we can play, and there's no more media center. There's no more smartphone, Cortana, or Windows Phone. Cortana's really dead, even though we're not really talking about it that way yet. Microsoft lost again and again and again. But it's like, guys, this is what they do. This is what they do. It's again, not necessarily my personal preference or wheelhouse or whatever, but it is no less viable and is still important.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this continues to grow up. Right, we're going to see.
Yeah,
I know $3,500 is a lot of money, but to an enterprise, especially in the manufacturing segment, that's nothing. If they can go buy 5 of these and have only one remote technician tell random Joe how to fix a machine from a distance, it'll pay for itself instantly. So it's
on the flip side as well. The other thing is this thing costs Microsoft at least $3,500 to make too. So it doesn't matter what the units are here. This is not how HoloLens is successful. HoloLens is successful because of the attached Azure services and whatever else that they're buying from Microsoft, right? So there's no one out in the world who's like, yeah, we're kind of a Google Docs house and we do a lot of Google technology, but we want to have HoloLens for this one thing. I suppose actually that's technically possible, but it's unlikely, if not impossible, for any business to be using HoloLens and not be using something Microsoft.
Yeah.
It's going to tie to these back-end services. It just is. And the degree of what that is going to vary from business to business, but it's going to go from something to a lot of something. It's not ever going to really be zero. And, I don't know. If you think of like a Ford, I'll keep using the automaker thing. Let's say the Ford is, and they may not be, but let's pretend they're like an Office 365 customer and they have X number of employees, 60,000, 100,000, whatever it is. They're all on Office 365 and that's all kinds of money. And they buy 15, 20, 50 HoloLens, devices, whatever. That's not where Microsoft's making the money off of that stuff. It's going to be, well, now we need to tie into AI to do this. And we got to, they're going to be subscribing to these services, and that's where the money is there, and I think these things chain off of each other. Microsoft is unique because they can offer this as part of a bigger package, and no one else can. Surface Hub is like this, right? Will there be individual? Yes, you'll probably see Surface Hub hanging in a hotel somewhere because it's really cool and whatever. And maybe those guys are not Microsoft customers in general. They just want this really cool looking display that can swivel around, maybe. But the truth is, most of the companies that buy that stuff are heavily invested in Microsoft.
Yep.
And I think that HoloLens is the same exact kind of value proposition.
I would agree.
It's this thing they can plug in that no one else can have. No one has.
Yeah, and it's not something you can just go whip up, right? It's not a smartphone that you can go and get a generic manufacturer to make for you. I mean, this is a pretty significant investment.
Yeah, I mean, even in the first version, there were cool demos that were real world enough to make sense. You're trying to repair an electrical circuit and you got a little Skype video floating there and the guy's like, attach this thing to the green wire or whatever. That's cool, but the things where people are designing, I mean, people are going to be, designing a car. I mean, what comes after that? Like designing DNA, basically. I mean, in a 3D space in front of you or whatever. There's all kinds of architectural, construction.
Anything that you touch, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, as long as you're not building softwares, if you can touch it, HoloLens probably works for it.
Yeah, there are the medical things where it's like literally parts of the body you can virtually pull out, body parts to see what's inside or whatever, and have a better understanding of this thing in 3D space, which would be valuable for a surgeon, frankly, because you can look at pictures all you want, but being able to rotate around a model of it in, I almost said real life, but in whatever virtual space is, the next step up. It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. It'll be interesting to see how this evolves. I'm hoping that they can find out ways, which I'm sure they will, to make them smaller, because obviously I think the ideal that everyone wants is you just throw on a pair of sunglasses and then you get the full experience. But we're a bit away from that.
But that too, I would say, like the field of view, is something that will happen over time, right?
I
And
agree.
even this version is significantly lighter, and at least in the way it feels, and less awkward, right? There was always this thing like it was either bearing down too much on your nose, or was kind of pinching the back of your skull, and it wasn't quite on right. So like the HoloLens thing was a little too high, and then you couldn't, this one you kind of like just pop it on. It's like, oh, there it is. And it like, I don't really even, feel this. You're not going to walk around outside with it on. You look like an idiot, and you I couldn't anyway, really. But, battery life is another one of those issues I think they need to solve. But they've already, this one, it really does it is a step up in every case here. And it's not hard to imagine them solving the obvious problems: field of view, battery life, lightness, size, etc. That stuff, that all happens together. It will happen. There will be subsequent generations where they get all that stuff right.
Yeah, I agree. What I was going to say here is, it's one thing to want that, but Microsoft now has the technology. Usually, I want to qualify it, usually easier to take technology you have, right, and shrink it down than try to create something brand new in a form factor that's ideal. So they've got 50% of the equation done, where they've got the technology. Now they got to work on figuring out how to shrink it down, and they've got time. I think the best analogy I can think of here is look at the smartphone. We used to look at smartphones and be like, man, wouldn't it be great if that display was just the whole front of the phone? 4 years ago, 5 years ago, or whatever.
Sure.
And it took time, but now we have phones, and the whole thing is the display. And so this will it'll take its time, but it's exciting.
Yeah, I would say the phone example is a good one, because it would have been hard to look at a phone from a few years ago and say, imagine what this might look like if there were no bezels on it. It's like, yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah.
And obviously we're going to get there. And then these breakthroughs come where you can have in-screen fingerprint readers or behind the screen cameras and sensors and things, and eventually the holes and the notches and all that stuff disappears and the bezels go away. And by that point, we won't even want smartphones anymore, but we will get there.
We will. We will. Well, Paul, you got anything else for this holographic filled episode?
No, I mean, I yesterday it was hard to contemplate this, but I got up at 7:00 in the morning to go for my meeting, and 7:00 in the morning Barcelona time is 1:00 in the morning here. And by the time I got home last night, it was 11:00 at night. And to even contemplate what that day means, like logistically, like you wake up in sunny, beautiful Barcelona, do some meetings, go out to eat, go to the airport, spend 8 hours on a plane. It took us forever to get out of this airport. It was unbelievable. Yeah. Newark is every airport in the United States is terrible. It doesn't matter. But, but what a day, like that, like the length of that day is astonishing. It's like, what is that? 22 hours of non-sleep basically. So yeah, I'm going to be worth not much of a damn today, I think is what I'm trying to say.
It's just another day that ends in Y. It's just another day that ends in Y. All right. Well, folks, that wraps it up for today. Paul wrote up his feelings on HoloLens, his love relationship with it. Actually, you can just go find it on Throughout. A bunch of other good content out today and yesterday, for that matter. I'm going to hit the end button here, but it's probably not going to play any music. But have yourselves a wonderful Wednesday, and we'll catch you right back here next time.